I don't really know why I'm writing this now, after everything. It's late again, one of those nights I can't sleep, and I figured if I got it out of my head and onto a screen maybe it would stop hurting. So bear with me. This is going to be long, because I need to get all of it right, every piece of it, in order, or I don't think I'll ever stop turning it over in my head. We moved into this house back in the spring. My wife passed a little over a year ago, and after that I couldn't keep up with the mortgage on one income, not with 2 kids. So we downsized. Smaller house, smaller yard, new town, new school mid-year for both kids, which is its own kind of cruelty when you're a certain age. My daughter is 14. She hated every part of it. Her friends were an hour away now and she made sure I knew it, every single day. Doors closed a little too hard, answers a little too short. My son is 5. He didn't really understand what had happened to his mom, and he definitely didn't understand why we were leaving the only house he'd ever lived in. He just wanted me to be okay. He'd tell me that, out of nowhere, standing in the kitchen with a bowl of cereal in his hands. "I want you to be happy, Dad." 5 years old, saying that to his father. The day the moving truck pulled up, I was hauling a box of my wife's old kitchen things up the driveway when a man came across the lawn from next door. Brian. Late 50s, maybe older, hard to tell. He told us right off the bat that he'd lost his wife a few years back, before either of us had said much of anything at all, like he wanted that fact on the table before we could form any other opinion of him. He was a little awkward. Stood too close when he talked. Laughed too long at his own jokes, and sometimes at things that weren't jokes. But he seemed harmless. Sweet, in a lonely old man kind of way. He talked about how exciting it must be, starting somewhere new, and I glanced over at my daughter without meaning to, because she was standing there with her arms crossed looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "Not everyone's excited," I said. He followed my eyes to her and something in his face shifted, before he smiled it away. "She'll come around," he said. "New places just take time." She was watching him the whole time he said it, and she didn't say a word, but I remember the look on her face. That first night, after the truck pulled away and the house was just boxes stacked to the ceiling in every room, I heard her on the phone upstairs with one of her old friends. I stood outside her door for a second, deciding whether to knock, and decided against it. She needed space to grieve the move in her own way, I figured, same as she was still grieving her mother in her own way. I think about that decision more than almost any other one I made. Not because it was wrong, exactly. Just because it was the first of so many times I chose to leave her alone with something instead of asking what it was. Over that first week Brian was at our door constantly. A casserole one night. A bag of tomatoes from his garden the next. Little things, the kind of stuff you'd expect from a retiree with nothing but time and no one to spend it on. My daughter wanted no part of any of it. She'd disappear upstairs the second she heard his voice at the door. Teenage moodiness, I figured, same as everything else. It was around the second week that the gift started shifting toward my son almost entirely. A remote control car, still in the box. A set of dinosaur figures that must have run him $30 or $40. Old men get generous when they're lonely, is what I chalked it up to. Brian started timing himself around us. Not obviously, but if I look back at it now, he was always outside exactly when my son was. Watering a lawn that didn't need it whenever he was in the front yard. Finding a reason to be at his own mailbox at the exact moment the school bus dropped my kids off, always with some comment aimed at my son first, before anyone else got a word in. There was a moment, maybe the 10th or 11th day, when he said something I brushed off completely and now can't stop replaying. My son had scraped his knee on the driveway and Brian was out front and came jogging over faster than a man his age should be able to jog. He crouched down, looked at the knee, and said, "Oh, that's nothing. You should see what I patched up on the last one." Then he caught himself, laughed it off, said something about being a Boy Scout leader once upon a time. I remember thinking it was an odd thing to say and letting it go in about 4 seconds. I had a business to run and a house to unpack. I didn't have room in my head for every odd thing a lonely old man said. Around that same stretch I had a work emergency come up on short notice, a client meeting I couldn't push, and no sitter lined up because we didn't know anyone in town yet well enough to ask. Brian happened to be out front when I was scrambling to figure out what to do, and he offered to just keep an eye on my son for the hour I'd be gone, said he had toys and cartoons and it would be no trouble at all. I remember actually considering it, standing there with my keys in my hand, running late. Thinking it might genuinely solve my problem. My daughter was the one who put a stop to it. She came down the stairs, must have heard the tail end of the conversation through her window, and told me she'd watch her brother herself, that I didn't need to leave him with the neighbor. I told her I appreciated it but she had her own things to do that afternoon, and she said it didn't matter, she'd rather stay home. I didn't push back. Some part of me was relieved not to have to make the decision myself. I never once asked her why it mattered so much to her. About 2.5 weeks in, I was getting the mail when Paul, the neighbor from across the street, caught me at the curb. Paul's the kind of guy who mows on Saturdays and waves but doesn't stay, so when he stayed, I knew it was something. He didn't dance around it the way I expected. He looked almost sick saying it, like the words had been sitting in him a while and he'd finally decided somebody needed to hear them. He told me flat out that Brian made his skin crawl, had for years, and that he wasn't the only one on the street who felt that way. He said Brian and his wife had fostered a handful of kids at one point, different boys mostly, a few months here, a school year there, and every single one of them had eventually been moved along to another family, quicker than Paul ever thought made sense. He mentioned one boy in particular, Marcus, who'd stayed the longest of any of them, almost a full year. Who'd apparently run off from the house twice before the county finally pulled him and placed him somewhere else for good. Paul said nobody ever got a straight answer out of the boy about why he kept running, just that he'd go quiet whenever anyone tried to ask. He said none of the kids ever said much about it while they were still around, kids that age rarely do, but a couple of the neighbors back then swore the boys always seemed to go quiet and small whenever Brian was in the room. I know how it sounds, Paul said, but I wouldn't let that man within 10 feet of my own kids, and I haven't in 15 years. Something's wrong with him. Everyone on this street knows it. Nobody's ever been able to prove anything, so nobody talks about it out loud, but I'm telling you. Keep your son away from him. I mean it. I told my kids that night to keep their distance from him. My daughter didn't even look up from her phone, but I caught her nodding, like I was only just now agreeing with something she'd already decided weeks earlier. My son asked why, and I told him Brian was probably fine but I just wanted him closer to home for a while. He nodded the way he does when he's not really listening. Later that same night, at dinner, my son said something that stopped me mid-bite. Good things come to those who wait. I laughed, because it sounded so strange coming out of a 5-year-old, this little saying that belonged to somebody's grandfather, not a kindergartner still working on his table manners. I asked him where he'd heard it. Brian says that, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I told him not to talk to Brian anymore. My daughter, across the table, put her fork down hard enough that it made a sound against her plate. I told you he was weird, she said, not even looking up. I told her I knew, I was handling it, and she gave me a look like she didn't believe that for a second. I didn't think much of the look at the time. A few days later I was doing dishes and looked out the window over the sink and saw my son standing near the back fence, talking. Not to himself. Talking, and then pausing, like there was somebody on the other side answering him. I dried my hands and went out and asked who he was talking to. Brian, he said, easy as anything, like I'd asked what color the sky was. I looked toward Brian's house and caught the end of his sliding glass door closing, slow, unhurried, like he had been standing there and had simply decided the conversation was over rather than been caught in the middle of it. That was the only time it ever happened, because I made sure of it. I walked straight over to his house and knocked hard enough that it probably rattled something inside, and when he opened the door I didn't hold back. I told him to stay away from my kids, and especially my son. I told him if I caught him near that fence again, I didn't care what was true and what wasn't, I'd make sure every person on this street heard exactly what Paul had told me and then some. He didn't argue. He just stood there and took it, shoulders dropping, apologizing in this quiet, defeated way, saying he'd gotten carried away, that he was lonely, that he hadn't meant any harm by it. I remember almost feeling sorry for him. There was a block party toward the end of that first month. Folding tables in someone's driveway, a grill going, kids running between yards with no real boundary to any of it. Brian showed up, and I watched something happen that I didn't fully register at the time for how obvious it was. Conversations trailed off the second he joined them. A woman gathered her 2 kids under the excuse of getting them a plate of food the moment he crouched down near their end of the yard. A man I'd met exactly once angled his whole body between Brian and his daughter without seeming to think about it, like it was a reflex. Nobody said anything to his face. Nobody had to. At some point I lost track of my own daughter for a few minutes. And when I found her again she was standing near the fence line at the edge of the yard, close enough to Brian that I could tell they were mid-conversation, her arms crossed, her voice low but sharp in a way I recognized even from a distance. By the time I got over there she was already walking away from him, and Brian was doing that same defeated shoulder drop I'd seen on his doorstep. I asked her what that was about. She said she told him to stop hovering around her brother, that it wasn't normal, that she didn't care how lonely he was. I told her that was probably enough, that I'd already handled it, and she said, quiet, like she didn't fully expect me to hear her, I don't think you have. I let it go. After that, things went quiet. Genuinely quiet. No more gifts. No more crouching at the fence. No more watering a lawn that didn't need it whenever my son was outside. I felt bad, honestly, about how hard I'd come at him. Maybe he really was just a sad old man who'd forgotten how to act around children because he didn't get the chance anymore. My son changed a little too, in ways I noticed but couldn't place at the time. He'd go quiet sometimes for no reason, staring off in the middle of a game like his mind had wandered somewhere I wasn't invited. I asked him once what he was thinking about and he just shrugged and said nothing, the same shrug his sister gave me about everything. Just a phase, I figured. Kids that age get moody too, they just don't have the words for it yet. My daughter grew quieter during that stretch too, but it was a different kind of quiet than her usual moodiness. Watchful, almost. A few times I caught her looking out the kitchen window toward Brian's house for longer than made sense, like she was keeping tabs on something the rest of us had stopped paying attention to. I asked her once if everything was okay and she just said fine, and went back upstairs. Still adjusting to the move, probably. There was always some explanation close at hand that summer, some reason it was easier not to sit with how little I actually understood about what was happening under my own roof. Looking back now I can see all of it laid out like a trail. At the time it was just noise. Small, forgettable noise. She didn't come home from school on time one Thursday. I didn't panic right away. I thought maybe she was with new friends, finally starting to feel like she belonged somewhere. By 4 o'clock I started calling her phone and getting nothing. By 5:30 I was calling the parents of the 2 girls she'd mentioned in passing over the last few weeks, girls I'd never met, and neither of them had seen her since the final bell. By 6 o'clock I called the school. By 6:30 I called the police. I'm not going to walk through every hour of that night here. If you've ever had to make that call, you know what it does to you, and if you haven't, I hope to God you never do. The officer who took my first call asked all the right questions, calm and practiced in a way that somehow made it worse, because it meant this was a situation he'd seen before, and my daughter had just become a case number. He told me they'd start with her known route, her friends, her phone records, and that a unit would canvass the area that night. He told me, gently but plainly, that the most useful thing I could do was stay by the phone in case she turned up on her own or someone called with information. I couldn't do that. I know now it might have been the wrong choice, or at least not the one they wanted from me, but I couldn't sit in that kitchen doing nothing while it was still light enough outside to see anything at all. So once the officers had what they needed from me, I got in my car and started driving her route home from school myself, slow. That route cuts down our street on its way in. Past our house. Past his. His car wasn't in the driveway. The house looked wrong in the dark. No lights. One of the front curtains gone entirely, just bare glass where it used to hang. The front door sat open a few inches, like it had been pulled shut in a hurry and hadn't quite caught. I called it in right there from the driveway, standing on his lawn with my phone against my ear, telling the dispatcher what I was looking at and where I was. She told me to wait for a unit. I didn't wait. Some part of me already knew, I think, standing there on his porch, and some part of me needed to see it before anyone else could tell me what it meant. The house was mostly empty. Furniture gone from some rooms, still sitting untouched in others, like he'd only taken what mattered to him and abandoned the rest without a second thought. There was one door at the end of the hallway that was closed, and the second I opened it I understood this room was different from the rest of the house. Clean. Cared for. Maintained, in a house that had otherwise been stripped and left to rot. The walls were covered, every inch of them, in photographs of my daughter. Not recent ones, not just from the last few days. All of them, going back to the very first days we'd moved in. Her walking to the bus stop. Her sitting in the backyard reading. Her framed through what had to be our own kitchen window, at the table, not looking at whoever was holding the camera, because she never knew anyone was there to hold it. On the desk beneath the photographs there was a single sheet of paper, folded once, with my name written on the front in that same tidy handwriting. I want to put down here exactly what it said, because I think about it more than I think about almost anything else right now. It read, "I hope you understand I never meant your son any harm. Boys just remind me of a version of myself I never got to keep. I'm sorry if I ever made you worry. You're a good father. Better than most I've watched over the years. I could see how hard you were trying to carry 2 kids on your own. I've taken care of a few boys like that before. They needed me more than anyone ever gave me credit for. People always find reasons to be afraid of a man who only wants to help. I knew which one of you needed me most since the day the truck pulled into your driveway, before I'd even shaken your hand. Some things a man just knows the moment he sees them. A father only has so much of himself to give. Yours went to your son. I watched her. Long enough. Close enough. She never once looked happy standing in a room with you, and you never noticed, and I did. You don't need to worry about her anymore. I'll take care of that part now, the way you clearly never had the time to. She'll understand soon enough why I waited as long as I did. Think of it as one less thing." I understood everything at once, standing in that room. Every gift for my son had been real, in his own mind. He believed every word of what he'd written. He believed those boys had needed him. He believed he was doing something kind. I don't know what happened to them, not really, not the way I'd need to know it to say it out loud, but I know enough now to understand that whatever those boys felt when they went quiet and small in his house was never gratitude, no matter what he'd convinced himself of. My daughter's fear of him was real from the start. I dismissed it for months as moodiness, as a bad mood about a bad move. She was the only one of us who ever saw him clearly, and I had months of chances to ask her what she saw, and I never once took them. I'm not writing this because I think someone is going to solve anything at this point. The police have had that note and every photograph for a while now, and there are people far more capable than me working this case than I ever could be. I'm writing it because there's still nothing else for me to do most nights. My house is quiet and my son is asleep down the hall and I am sitting up in the dark again thinking about how a man can convince himself, completely, that taking something from you is the same as helping you. Paul warned me plainly and I still let my guard down. My daughter warned me too, in her own way, more than once, and I heard the words without ever once hearing what she meant by them. Harmless and a little awkward are not the same thing. I know that now. I would give almost anything to have known it then.